I'm Julia Cleverdon. I'm from the UK. I've had the immense fun in the last 40 years of working across quite a lot of different sectors, understanding something about the competitiveness of the UK and where our future lies and where we're to find the talent, grow the talent, move the talent to shape a society which is equitable, which gets to what I would say are the diamonds in the dust, who are absolutely brilliant young people who have got dustbin lids on top of them. And I suppose if I look back on my life, I started working in an enormous, now completely gone industry in industrial relations in British Leyland Swindon Body and Assembly Plant. 35,000 people on one site, hardly any women. I was the most junior industrial relations officer. I learnt a lot from the bottom up about the amount of energy, talent, drive, ability there was on the front line, which managers up the line never bothered to consult, never bothered to ask, never bothered to involve, never bothered to say, what can we do better? What's your advice? And that shaped for me a lot of my future life, because I just believed that leadership at the point of work is the most important single thing that anybody can do. You won't get talent, energy, motivation unless you understand what's going on the front line. And the bottom line is the front line, and the front line is the bottom line. And so I worked a lot in the business world. Then I went on after the riots in Britain in the early 80s, where, to our immense surprise, a great group of young West Indian teenagers basically took the streets, to the surprise of much of the business world who'd not really taken in that there was an issue. And I began to get involved with trying to understand what the issue was on the front line on the streets. And if it's 5 times more likely for a black teenager to be unemployed than for a white, you begin to ask the questions about what's the education, what's the recruitment, how is this talent understood, who knows anything about it, what's the business world been doing. They're meant to be close to their markets, close to their customers, close to their consumers, close to their communities. How do they not know this? And I then joined an organisation called Business in the Community in the late 80s and became the chief executive and ran that for 20 years as the hired hand. I was the chief executive, but I had a tremendous, powerful collection of great business leaders and others who were shaping and stewarding the way forward. And much of the 90s and the early decade of this century, we agonised a lot about what was the role of business. Prosperous high streets needs prosperous back streets, what was going on in the most deprived communities, and that led me very fast into what was happening in education and what were we doing in the relationships between employers and schools, employers and universities. How were they connecting? What did they understand about what was going on? And what sort of educational opportunities were there for young people, particularly in communities where we'd had generations of unemployment. As the changes had gone through Britain, mining had gone, shipbuilding had gone, manufacturing began to go. What was the future? And what was the purpose of it all? And that took me into understanding more about frontline leadership in schools. I had a group of businesses who were saying, well, what can we do to help? What could we do to make most difference? And interestingly, we'd been running rather a good programme, which the Prince of Wales, who was the president of Business in the Community, had been extremely enthusiastic and had helped to get going, called Partners in Leadership, which had put business leaders and head teachers together as a leadership partnering, really. It wasn't mentoring, there was no sense that one lot knew something and the other lot didn't. It was about partners in leadership. And I remember the Prince invited 150 partners to a reception at Highgrove to talk about what had worked. And he said at the end of the reception to me, well, that's fascinating, Julia. I understand what the business world is getting out of this, which has dramatically increased their understanding of schools in the most challenging communities, where the business world has suddenly discovered that actually there are 80 languages being spoken in this school around the corner, and they didn't know. And if they're meant to have their eye on where talent is coming from, they've got to do some things to get a welcome mat out in their businesses for diverse communities. And it's dramatically improved the quality of conversations at dinner parties in North London. But I don't understand why are the schools doing this? Why are the heads keen on this partnering? Have we done any proper evaluation? So I said, well, no, sir, actually, I don't think we have really. We've got a lot of anecdotal evidence, but not much else. And he said, well, get a proper evaluation done. And the following morning I was with McKinsey and a group of businesses, and I said to McKinsey, could you do the evaluation for us? And everybody looked at poor McKinsey and they could see they'd got to do it. And they said, well, we're just not going to only ask that question. We're going to say, what's the biggest challenge that the business world could help schools tackle? And a group of the McKinsey team went out to talk to 50 head teachers, including a man called Brett Vigdorts, who was employed by McKinsey. And at the end of that time, Brett came back and said the 50 heads say that their biggest challenge is that if the New Zealanders and Australians who could teach stopped coming around the world, we in London would be unable to teach maths, science or English. We have no maths, science or English teachers in these tough schools. We are entirely dependent on Kiwis on a world trip. And if God knows whether the business world can do anything about it, but if they don't, I don't understand where we're going to find any solutions. And I'd seen Teach for America many years back, but never thought we'd transfer it to Britain. And it was from then that Brett Vigdorts took leave of absence from McKinsey, got the business plan together. A great group of businesses came round that idea, and we began to look at what the challenge was in actually getting talent through in Britain. Was very much to do with the quality of education in some of our most deprived schools, where actually we could not get talent to come and teach. I think the evidence was there were only 6 teachers who'd come out of Oxbridge to teach in 2001, and none of them had gone to schools in challenging communities. So we set out, great leadership by Brett, to drive this forward, and much of my last 10 years of life have been spent chairing Teach First in the UK and seeing amazingly that young people today, graduates coming out of great universities, they want passion and purpose in their life. They want to make a difference. This millennial generation is different to that which there's been before. And of course, for some, the mating call of the Porsche and the money matters. Well, but for many, it doesn't matter most. And there's something that they have found in coming to join Teach First, which has massively contributed both to the change in many of the schools in the toughest communities. If you look now in London, between 2007 and 2014, we put about 3,500 Teach Firsters into 10 square miles of London. And we've doubled the performance in the measures that we measure in, which is our young people achieving 5 A to C's in their GCSE. And we've gone from about 33% in 2007, we're achieving that, to 66%. So it's better now to be a poor child in London than it is to be a rich child elsewhere. We will produce you a better education with more life chances and more opportunities. So that's been pretty transformational in my understanding of the importance that actually, and this I think is my view now on talent, the problems and the challenges that we face whether for Britain now, and for Europe, this incredible outpouring of migration coming out of war-torn parts of the world, flooding across Europe, trying to find a purchase and a foothold to belong and to be part of. And the whole of the challenges of climate change and what is the future and what do we do to keep the temperature down and manage our footprint on the planet in a more sustainable and renewable way. All of those problems can't be solved by one sector alone. It isn't business who can do it. It isn't the public sector alone who can do it. It isn't the not-for-profit or voluntary sector alone. You can only solve these big challenges by putting a real combination of the skills of all three sectors. And in Britain, as we now try to live within our means, which we hadn't really been doing, which causes the most immense challenges in communities as the support and some of the scaffolding is taken away, the only way forward is to try to find strength in communities, strength from community leadership, from the business world, the education world, the local authorities, the social services, and people of goodwill who want to make a difference. So I suppose in a way what I'm thinking about at the minute is how do you build that collaboration? I happen to be here in New Zealand looking at the work across the globe of the spreading of the experience of the Teach for New Zealand model, which Teach for America, Teach First, Teach for Bulgaria, Teach for Chile, Teach for more than 40 countries here now with representatives trying to tackle that issue. What do you do to attract some of the highest caliber young graduates to come and teach and play their part in leadership in some of the most challenging communities in the world? Nepal, Pakistan, China. How do you do that? What's the cause? Why does it matter? Now, it does not mean that they will all stay in teaching. We're keeping 60%. That's about the average across the network. But Australia's keeping more. New Zealand's keeping more. But how do we hone an education system which is going to be flexible and creative enough to face the challenges of the next 30 years? I mean, heaven knows what the world will look like in 30 years' time. All we know is that it will be more and more connected by technology, and yet in some ways more and more broken by the lack of personal responsibility and engagement. So for me, one of the things I've been very involved in Britain is trying to learn from the rest of the world about what they're doing to get their young people supported and energised and connected into community need. It's not the case that we only send children to school in order to achieve 5 A to C's at GCSE. That cannot be the purpose of education. Education must be about helping young people to give more and get more from their lives, which I think also means giving more and getting more from their communities. And we've seen some incredible examples here in New Zealand of the amazing commitment to the Maori history, to giving young people roots from where they came and wings to fly. And in Britain, we're running a campaign, which the Prince of Wales is the patron of, called Step Up to Serve, which says, what do we need to do to support young people in what seems to me now to be a very great young people wish to be involved and to take charge and to make the world a better place and to contribute to society and to have a voice about what they think should be done, and then to get on and do it. And in our experience in the UK, all the surveys we're doing looking at young people from the ages of 10 to 20 is that schools and college leadership have an immense impact on all of this. They can make it easy or they can make it quite a lot of stumbling points and many difficulties as to I know nobody can borrow the minivan to go to wherever, and no, we can't let anybody out by X, and no. And so we've created a partnership in Britain now between all the sectors to see how could we achieve getting 60% of all young people between the ages of 10 and 20 involved in their communities, practical action in the service of others. Sometimes called youth social action, but call it whatever you like. And it's been really fascinating last 2 years. We're coming up to our second anniversary. We've got to get to this goal by 2020. And you can see that actually it's possible to do, but it requires immense collaboration between the sectors. So the business world, who are employers, have got to say, look here, we believe that young people who do this stuff are building their resilience, their employability, their skills, their soft skills, their hard skills, their any skills you like. Kids who do this will make the world a better place and will probably be great contributors in the businesses that we are trying to attract them to. But you've got to grow it and you've got to make it easier. So we're doing all the things we possibly can in the support of great schools and colleges that are already doing it. And what's fascinating is to discover that actually some of the greatest primary schools have got this absolutely embedded in how they run their schools and run their creativity and run their culture and run their system. This is part of the moral, cultural and spiritual imperative, which is what schools are there for. So I think we've learned quite a lot. We've learned from Canada, where they've got 58% of all young people involved in youth social action, because no young person graduates out of college without being able to show a record of achievement in the community and 150 hours as a minimum in that year. We are very interested in the AmeriCorps model, where they built a service year into their young people's journey, which is all party, supported by presidents of every hue, passed on from president to president as part of what America believes in. And in Britain, we've seen some immense big pledges from organisations like the Scouts or Enterprise or Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme about what it would take for them to double their numbers. In the Scouts now, nearly 500,000 young people belong to the Scouts. Government's just done a £10 million contribution to help the Scouts make this happen in deprived communities, have been in the past in more middle class, Guildford, Surrey, Berkshire. But 400 new units have begun in some of the most important communities in our country, and they've got a 95% fill rate. But the limiting factor for the Scouts is their ability to find adult team leaders who will come and support troops. So that is where you need a big public-private voluntary sector partnership to make these things happen. So I'm partly over here in New Zealand understanding what you are already doing and what we could learn from and creatively swipe back to the UK in order to do more to grow the talent that is there in every community and which none of us in the future can afford to lose a drop of it and not concentrate on every young person reaching the full potential, the very best they can be, and always with an eye on how they as individuals and leaders, as members of communities, will make the difference. I suppose I've always been a campaigner. I can't remember a time when I didn't have a campaign. When I went up to university and stood to be the president of the junior common room, everybody else was standing for world peace and, student governance, and I was standing for compulsory bicycle classes for freshers and could we have a laundrette in Newnham College, Cambridge. So I've always seen life through perhaps bottom up. How do you do the practical things keep your eyes on the hills but your feet very firmly on the ground. And I suppose when we were setting up Step Up to Serve, and the origins of this was because the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, had set up an incredible programme called the National Citizen Service, which was to offer to all 16-year-olds in Britain, over the lifetime of his parliament, the opportunity to go on a 3-week incredible opportunity of young people working together in a sort of quasi boot camp, learning new skills, making new friends, challenging pursuits, youth social action. And as ever, Prime Ministers are powerful and persuasive about why their particular policies will change the world. But of course, as ever, bit of a dragnet on, well, a lot of money's being put down into this new programme. What about all the other programmes that have been going for years on end, trying to do very much the same sort of thing, but nobody seems to have given them any money? So I was asked to do a review about how did this whole world of the not-for-profit voluntary sector, working with young people, what was the vision? Where do we need to go to? And I said, well, the truth is, as ever with politicians, very grateful to them, but this is a political flagship. But it's in a flotilla of great operations which are already trying to make something of the same difference. So we should just be clear that this is a flotilla and that we've got to do better together to pass the parcel, make the connections, make the progression, make sure that between the ages of 10 and 20, young people are continually encouraged to build up into some of the great things that some of our great student unions are doing, where you've got fantastic numbers of young people at university and in colleges doing great things in their community, coaching football, supporting young readers, all sorts of stuff. But this should not be seen as a competitive operation. Of course, the voluntary sector competes with each other, but actually there's a long-term goal for Britain of what we're trying to achieve. And therefore, when me and my co-founder Amanda Jordan were putting together the plan, I suppose we said, let's get all the different sectors of society to make a pledge about what they will do. And then let's get the pledge up on the website. Amazing what you can do now with websites. And then let's hold everybody's feet to the flames every year and say, so have we achieved it? And in doing that, you begin to discover that there are some incredible opportunities which we haven't quite taken in. That actually a great hospital in London, King's College Hospital, have got 1,000 volunteers working in their hospital. And 50% of their volunteers are under 21. As a result of a brilliant director of nursing recognising, in partnership with the trade unions in the hospital, that they were never going to have the resources that they might want to do all the things that hospital needed to do. And that we could either say, well, we just haven't got the resources, so therefore we won't have anybody to see whether an old lady is actually able to feed herself, or whether this old man who's not very well has had any water at all during the day, or whether somebody who's desperately looking for their mother who is in accident and emergency and is dying, but they can't find the way through to A&E, whether anybody says, shall I take you there? You've obviously got lost down this tunnel. I'm so sorry. Let's take you there at once. Or in the stroke unit, where all the evidence is that if you can move people's limbs within 5 hours of that stroke taking place, you will keep the use of that limb. But you could never employ enough physios to do that work for 40 people in that stroke ward. And this brilliant director of nursing, with a great philanthropist, had said, let's see what we can do to get volunteers to come and do the things, not the stuff which only nurses or only doctors or only porters can do, but let's find the opportunities where they could do more. So there are 1,000 volunteers and 50% of them are under 21. And yet you look across the rest of the health service and very frequently we're using great volunteers, they're all over 60, and they're doing flower water and book pushing. And there is some evidence that lots of hospitals are refusing to have flowers any longer, and lots of people aren't reading many of the books. So what are we doing? So we decided to really try to join the dots between the sectors, see what all of us who have an influence on young people could do, whether those were the voluntary organisations or the businesses and the commercial world who are seeking to influence, seeking to sell, seeking to recruit young people, what the health sector could do, but for me, critically, what the education sector could do. And that was the education sector starting earlier on in life than we had previously thought. I'd seen in Canada the amazing work of an organisation called Free the Children, which had been started by an incredible young entrepreneur who'd got passionate about how can these kids in parts of the world be being treated as slave labour? What can we do to free the children? And he, as a great cause man, had set up an organisation called Free the Children, which was about getting quite young primary school age kids to be involved in helping to change one thing in their community locally and one thing in a global community. And this had spread like wildfire across Canada and had a very clever business model in which the young people who got involved then earned points, and then everybody went to the incredible basketball stadium, and somebody like, Mrs. Clinton and the Dalai Lama just fell through the door and said, "You're great, you're making the world a better place, we're so grateful to you." And kids loved that and loved the recognition and loved the connections and the feeling that they were part of a movement. And partly as a result of the trip to Canada, it's come to Britain. It's in 2,000 primary schools from a standing start of hardly anything 2 years ago, and it's making an immense difference. So for me, I didn't take it face on into the curriculum. Now, you can argue about the curriculum. You can say it's dreadful in Britain that citizenship studies, which were part of the previous government's method of trying to build citizenship, new lot have said, no, we're not doing citizenship really anymore. We're only going in for academic rigour, and we don't think citizenship is an academic rigour. So say, okay, well, you win some, you lose some. But actually what matters most, in my experience, is the highest level that knows the front line. Therefore, who are the head teachers, deputy heads, senior leadership teams in schools, who increasingly, under both governments, so quite an all-party commitment, over the last 15 years has given more power to schools and has said, okay, you shape the education of your young people in Blackpool, in Burnley, in Redcar, in Tottenham. There is a national curriculum and there is an Ofsted. And we will, by and large, trust the professionals of the sector in partnership with their community to shape the education experience for young people. And when you get it wrong, we'll put you in special measures and we'll be absolutely vicious. But in an interesting way, it's unleashed an immense amount of energy and talent from leaders in the education system. So in May this year, I had 50 head teachers, principals, leaders of colleges together for a day to help us understand what they were doing in unleashing the talent of their young people. And it was the most rich day of examples of incredible things, great partnerships, some with marvellous voluntary organisations, incredible group in Bethnal Green Technology, working with Citizens UK, and Citizens UK won't work in a school unless they will work with the church, the synagogue and the mosque. So you start from the young people that you are seeking to serve, who in Bethnal Green, very heavily Muslim, some Christians, some Sikhs, some Jews, some Nothing. No particular belief, other than the belief that they're part of Bethnal Green. And the work that that school have done with Citizens UK, under the leadership of an immensely impressive leader called Mark Keary, has been transformational for Bethnal Green. That school is now achieving 92% A to Cs, which is one measure. But actually, interesting other measure, with a daughter in the Metropolitan Police, the youngest Detective Chief Inspector, antisocial behaviour in Bethnal Green on Bethnal Green Road has fallen by 48% since Mark Keary took on that school. Because he sends year 7s, 11-year-olds, in their first year out into the community, and it's a community of largely young Turks and young Pakistanis. And he sends the young Turks out to listen very frequently to older people from a community other than that which they know, to talk about, what are you frightened about? And they say, we're frightened of kids in hoodies, and we're frightened of being caught short on our way to the shops and not being able to find a loo, and we're frightened of those who we think bear us ill will. So year 7 just listens to the community. And then over the following year, they develop the projects and the programs which they themselves can help diminish that fear. So they commit to not wearing hoodies on the streets. They commit to getting to the newsagents up and down the Bethnal High Road and asking them to put up a sign which says, we're a safe haven, which means you can come and use our loo if you're caught short on the way to Sainsbury's. And to do all sorts of things which build relationships and understanding in that community. Very reminiscent of what I've seen here in New Zealand in the last 2 days, visiting some of the schools, understanding the sort of relationship building that we've got going in a way which actually encourages young people to feel a critical and valued part of their community, and to play an important part in building their legacy and their contribution. So it seems to me that Bethnal Green and South Auckland are not actually very far away from each other. I think on Teach First I was more, right, we've got a model here which we believe the early signs are that this is working. All the evidence is that young people in their education respond to the quality of teaching that they have. And there is also some evidence to show that if you put teachers in to teach who have not got the highest level of qualification in academic terms, they will not know what excellence looks like. So part of our trouble in London schools was that we could get nobody really to come and teach, except those with 3 E's at A-level. So we put in 3 E's at A-level, and they may be trying hard, but they don't actually know what a great science experiment or a brilliant history essay should look like. And therefore the attempt to get young people with humility, most important of all the things that we sieve for Teach First and which Teach for New Zealand sieve for. Young people with humility, great communication skills, a great passion, a great belief in young people. By and large, my experience is that young people can achieve anything that you believe they can achieve. And if you believe in them more than they believe in themselves, that talent will rise. So I think the 2 points that I've learned in the last 10 years in the education space is that the quality of teaching is absolutely critical to our ability to get talent from young people. And that if you, all my life I think, whether in the business world or in the education world or anywhere else, running charities, if you believe in people more than they believe in themselves, they can help. They will rise up to achieve great things. If you don't believe in them, they don't believe in themselves, they're in a downward spiral. Now it takes much more than that. It takes great skill and great persistence and great passion. But in general, that's what I think the human condition is probably about. So I think That's one of the most important things I've learned. And the other thing I learned is just never, never give up. Amazing how over 40 years of life, when I started in British Leyland Swindon Body and Assembly Plant, there was a sign in the yard which said no blacks, no Irish, no redheads need bother to apply. It is inconceivable now, as I come to 65, that I would see a sign anywhere in Britain, or indeed a belief that we could in any way allow a world in which we were not seeking to draw on the greatest possible talent from ethnic minorities, from redheads, from women, from the whole community, is what we need to tackle the challenges of our society.